What is up, you guys? Welcome to RBS Cinema, where we talk about movies each week. I'm your host, Devin, and with me I have Sam, who's back again from being sick last week. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to make it for our favorite movie, being John Wick, that we talked about last week. So
it's okay. We'll be back for the second. Trust me.
Yeah, at some point we'll talk about the second one for sure, and the third and fourth one 100%. Yeah. And we'll have to have Chris on as well.
Best is yet to come.
Yeah, because Chris hasn't seen the other ones.
I did not know that.
He didn't even watch the second one. He's only seen the first one. So that's definitely going to be something that we'll have to have him come back on, so that way he has a more fresh, in-depth thinking of the movie and how he feels about it.
It's going to be beautiful.
So, yeah. I was telling him about certain things that were happening in the third one, like when they're in the museum with him and the assassins. And...
Me too, yeah.
Was it the second one?
The second one, yes.
Yes, you're right.
7 rounds.
Yeah, because, because they were tracking him down. No?
We'll get to that.
I'm pretty sure it was the third one. Yeah, because in the second one, he executes the guy on continental grounds, and then now he's excommunicado. And then in the third one is when the huge contract comes out in the beginning, and so everybody's trying to get John Wick. And then he runs through the museum, and then that's when assassins find him, or Yakuza-esque characters.
Well, the second one's an art museum.
Yeah, the second one is the art museum, but I'm talking about the third one when they're in the historical weapons museum.
Okay.
So
that's different museum.
Yeah,
lots of museums.
Yeah, they're in so many museums in the second and third one. It's amazing.
He enters through museums and puts people in mausoleums.
Yeah, because the thing that I wanted to also mention in last week's episode was that. I wanted, because of the first and second movie, because I saw the first one, I had a fascination with trying to speak Russian, because I'm half Russian myself, so I wanted to be able to learn how to speak it, because growing up when I was a kid, very, very little, my dad spoke to me in Russian, and I would speak back to him fluently. My mom would sit there on the side and go what are you guys talking about? So I would tell her what we were talking about in Russian, but in English to her. So
it was about trying to get him into the Rosca Roma.
Yeah.
It's okay. You can say it out loud.
And then in the second one, I wanted to learn how to speak Italian because of that, too.
Man, this is just going to play into the second movie just so great.
Yeah. I mean, that was the thing that I was going to mention, but I completely spaced out it. But yeah, because of those, the first and second John Wick movies, it made me want to speak Russian and Italian. And so I actually went on Duolingo to try to actually learn how to speak Italian and Russian. But I ended up falling out of it because, of course, my ADHD, and I just couldn't focus anymore.
By the way, let us know what language you want Sam to learn, because I only know one. Put that in the comment section.
Why? Do you want to learn how to speak other languages?
I would actually want to find out. I want to see what other people say about that.
I know that Spanish is almost one of the easiest ones, if I remember correctly. Don't quote me on that, but I think it is. Otherwise, I can't remember.
So I got my German roots.
Because my dad is Russian and he speaks it fluently, and he was telling me that don't learn how to speak Russian unless you're not going to use it all the time, because that is a really, very difficult language to get down. But if you're not surrounded by it all the time, there's no use in learning it. Because I remember years ago when I was at one of my uncle's weddings, my other uncle flew in, and all of our family is Russian and stuff. They all are living in Chicago and everything, so they all came and whatever, and he was talking to them in the kitchen, and I remember one of our relatives talking to him in Russian, and context clues, because of him speaking English, he goes oh, I know what you're speaking in Russian because I can still understand it. I just don't know how to speak it anymore because I've been out of it for so long. But otherwise, I know what you're saying. And so they're like, oh, okay.
The human brain is fascinating.
So, it is. It really is. So, because even me and Kevin, Kevin doesn't speak English. Like, he can only speak Spanish. But yet, we can still understand each other because of that. And Fabian even said that you guys have that language barrier, but you guys can still understand each other. And we're like, yeah. So, I think that he probably understands a little English, but not, like, actually fluently. So, I don't know. But we'll get into the episode here. So, welcome, everybody, to the podcast. This week, we are going to talk about Late Night with the Devil. I don't know why, for whatever reason, throughout this whole week, I kept saying it is Interview with the Devil, because it's not. And I told it to my wife. She goes like, Interview with the Vampire? Is that what you're thinking? I was like, no. And then it finally clicked in my brain. I was like, no, it's Late Night with the Devil. Because for those of you that don't know, the whole consensus of the movie is that it's a late night talk show about the 70s. And the host has a friend of his that is not a paranormal research, but she has a research center to where she learned about this cult that was kind of like devil worshipping type thing, and she finds this girl and trying to like make her better or something like that, or basically trying to make her normal into the normal world, because that's all that she's ever known. But otherwise, they conjure up the demon that's inside of her, and then all hell, like literally hell, breaks loose. So, but yeah. Otherwise, we'll get into this unless you have anything.
Nope. Let's get right into it.
Okay. So, for those of you that don't know, first-time listeners, watchers, enjoyers, whatever you want to call yourself. Basically, what we do on here is that we talk about the movie. We go scene for scene, and we also talk about who directed it, starred in it, wrote it, all this bunch of good nitty-gritty stuff, and then we finally talk about the movie. And then we, at the end of it, we give our consensus on whether it is a rent, buy, or skip. Hence the reason why this is called RBS. And then we have a little bit more tidbits in there that we do for the show. I'm going to start incorporating taglines for the movie, so that way it's a little bit more fun to actually get a grasp on what the movie might be about, because, of course, to get people's attention on the poster, it's like, hey, here's this thing to grab you, to, like, get you to get more involved into the movie and actually watch it. And then we will finish it off with Raw People, where we talk about people that have given the movie, especially a really high regard movie, a low score on IMDb, and that way we can, prove them wrong, because they're wrong people, because they give a wrong opinion. So, and then at the end of it, after everything is all said and done, I will incorporate a fun surprise. So we'll get into that later on, but yeah, so we'll get into the movie here. So the movie was directed by Cameron and Colin Carnes, I believe is their last name. Mm-hmm. And they also wrote it as well. So they're, it seems like that they're brothers. I've never heard of them. This is actually a first time watch for me, because this came out last year in 2023.
Yeah, very, very new. So
definitely a newer movie on our block that we have definitely talked about. But we got key players here, got a few of them. We got David Dasmalchian. I believe that's how you pronounce his last name. Laura Gordon, Ian Bliss, Ingrid Torelli, who is Lily in the movie, the girl. And then Rice Aturi. He plays as I'm drawing a blank on his name right now.
I do as well.
But Christu. Yeah. That's who it is. Yeah. But so without further ado, we will get into the movie. So,
it's showtime.
So first thing off the bat, we wanted to talk about that there's almost 2 minutes of these production companies.
A lot of production companies went into this film.
Yeah, like I thought that was really strange, like having 2 full minutes, because like this is a lower budget movie, and because like it was by Shudder. Mm-hmm. And for those of you that don't know, Shudder is actually a streaming service of horror movies that you can go on, like Netflix, just horror movies and TV shows and stuff. They actually have out some pretty good original content, but this unfortunately was borderline one of them. And of course, we'll get to our consensus at the end of the movie. But this is like a pretty good movie for it being what it was, but at the same time, it kind of wasn't. It was a little lackluster. So
good way to put it.
Yeah, like it's teetering on whether it's a good movie or a not great movie. So definitely not a movie to just keep rewatching, I would say, for sure. So but otherwise, I thought that because they had a production company called Good Fiends with the little kid where it looked like he was having x-ray glasses on, and it was just like a bunch of his neighbors, the mailman and stuff that looked like monsters, and I'm like, that was pretty cute. I'm like, that was pretty cool. So, but yeah, getting right into the movie specifically. So, like I mentioned, movie is based about the 70s. It's a late night talk show, and we are introduced to a TV and the history of the world that was going on around the 70s, and basically riots, all this bunch of stuff that was happening. I didn't keep track of everything, but like, yeah, it's just history. And then we talk about the host, Jack, and his history in the show. So he was, I think he was rivaling Johnny Carson. That's what it was. But yeah, he was rivaling him in studio and stuff, and so he was just like, another late night talk show host. Jack was, and he's trying to get popularity. He's trying to get his name out there on television and everything. So like, yeah, and then I also found it interesting throughout the course of this movie that they added tidbits in, like things that they mentioned, and then that would go full swing at the end of it. So, but we'll get into that too. But otherwise, this specific movie timeline takes place on Halloween, the last night that this show aired. And
in 1977.
Yeah. I didn't write down the specific year, but yes, 1977. And pretty much what ends up happening is that he brings out this medium because, of course, he introduces the show, has some banter and everything like that, just like regular night shows. It's going to be a spooky night. Yeah. So, of course, like regular late night talk show people that they usually do that stuff. And he brings out Christu, who is a medium, and he basically talks to the dead, pretty much, or as he puts it, he is kind of like a ham radio for spirits.
That's exactly what he said.
So yeah, and that's how Christu puts it, and he
I couldn't help it. I'm sorry.
Yeah, he but yeah, he is talking about this spirit that's coming in, and Jack talks to this audience member, and he's just like, the guy is just like hammering in jokes and stuff like that. And so he's just like, yeah, like, my wife left me like 5 years ago. And he goes like, oh, so she didn't pass? And he goes like, no, like she left with my neighbor 5 years ago. Basically that whole back and forth, and he finally just goes like, all right, you know what, the spirit's gone, essentially. and like, and especially with one of the guy's car, which we'll introduce later, but I can understand for him of how he goes like, yeah, like he's a manipulator, because it seems like for Christu, he's like one of those like fake mediums where he just goes like, point out random audience members, and it's just like, okay, well, he doesn't have anything to do with the show, but then this person he points out does have something to do with the show, because either they will engage with questions with them beforehand, or they'll answer a questionnaire, however, like they'll mail it in, whatever the fact is, and then like he'll just talk about like, oh yeah, you used to have a sister, like Peggy, right? And like doing all that sort of gimmicky stuff. So
probing.
Yeah. So basically doing all that sort of thing. And then after a while of that, he talks with this two women, one being the mom, the other one being the daughter, and he just talks about the son being passed away some time ago, and they're like, yeah, like, you know, all this bunch of stuff, and, you know, like, just going back and forth with that whole thing, and then he's about ready to, like, get done, but then he ends up freaking out, like, it kind of seems like that he gets a headache, but I find it interesting because it's from the point of view of, like, the TV monitor, and, like, how it was all grainy, and, like, sometimes you would see the film, like, being degraded, like how they used to,
kind of
like
a
videotapes,
flashpoint moment,
yeah,
kind of a thing of like,
right.
Now something's almost like something is about to go wrong, or something is already actively going wrong in the moment.
Because when that happens,
like
all of a sudden, Christu freaks out, and he just, like, has this giant thing happening to him where this big spirit is talking with him.
He even says that this is more intense than before.
Yeah.
Out loud.
Right. And he's, like, trying to pinpoint who he talks about, Minnie. He goes, like, does anybody know a Minnie? And Jack, because earlier when he was talking to the first guy, he was getting the name wrong. And he was just like, hope, like, is it Millie or a Mandy? And he goes, like, no, it's Minnie. It's specifically Minnie. And
no question.
Yeah, and he talked about, like, an unmarried man still wearing a wedding ring, and Jack is just super confused and just, like, doesn't know what's going on.
Eyes rolling in the back of his head.
Yeah, the eyes rolling in the back of his head where they just look
pink.
Super glossed over too, because, like, I feel like that you could still kind of see his pupils barely. And I don't know if that was just because of, like, the contacts that he was wearing to make that scene more prevalent, or if that was just, like, them putting a film over the eye, like, for the movie specifically. So I don't know, but I thought that was actually, like, when I first watched it, it was actually like, wait, what the hell is happening?
I see a wedding ring. An unmarried man with a wedding ring. The spirit needs to talk to you. Who are you?
It's one of those non-gory moments. Like, for me, it's, I don't like these kind of moments. Like, when I know that it's this is where my unsettling point comes, because you just don't see people's eyes rolling into the back of their head every day.
Yeah,
you just don't.
Right.
So when you see it, I know it's a movie, but, like, this is the one part where I'm like, ugh. Like,
yeah.
I'm not scared yet, but I'm just like
a little creeped out. Like,
here we go.
Yeah,
this is where stuff's going.
Right, and, like, that's our first, like, scare of the movie.
Yeah, scare.
I'd
say more of a concern.
But this is, like, not the jumping off point for it being going off the rails, but this is when it starts. Like, something's not right. Things are unsettling.
This is the gurgling inside the stomach point of the movie. Yeah.
Right.
Let's keep going, but I don't like it.
Yeah, and, like, you know, the lights are flickering and stuff like that, and there's points in the movie where they would cut to commercial, and then you would see behind the scenes of
Love it.
Him walking around the studio and talking to the producers and, like, all the stuff and everything, like, and I think that's actually pretty interesting.
I love it because it really shows what show business is. That is show business. Seeing these cuts is not everything you see on the screen is the same as what's going on behind, and especially when things go wrong, it's even more prevalent. Because you got this failing show. What are we going to do to keep it going? We need some kind of crazy factor. Oh, I love this, but at the same time, I'm freaked out by it. What's going on? The show must go on. Yeah,
which, speaking of, I forgot to mention, like, originally, like, he was big and popular, and now his show is just dying. And his wife died. His wife died because of cancer, and so he left for, what was it, like a month and a half or something like that, and then he finally came back. And this is his, I think this might have been the first show that he came back for after that.
I think they even said his best ratings were the episodes with his dying wife.
Yeah. And I think it's probably the macabre behind it, of, like, the interest of it all, and going, like, oh man, you know, like, she's sick and she's dying, like, I have to find out what happens, type of thing.
Human nature.
Yeah, because, like, for me, definitely, I have the curiosity of that.
It's like watching an accident happen in real time. You can't look away.
Right. Like, you feel in your soul and in your heart that you want to be able to do something and help, but really, there's not much that you can do.
But you still want to know how it ends.
Right, exactly. And so we find the behind the scenes stuff for the show, and because that's what the narrator says at the beginning too is like, this is the last episode of the late night that happened, and everything changed forever. And we also see the behind the scenes stuff of him walking around, and I also found it interesting that all that stuff was in black and white too, because like the show is in like color, but the behind the scenes stuff is in black and white, which I found actually to be pretty fascinating.
And as I was just saying, it shows kind of the darker side of show business. The black and white isn't just to separate the scenery and what's going on and saying this is on air, this is off air. It is saying that, but it's also, this is the more cheery section, the more things you see, and this is the side of you're seeing the managers. You're seeing,
the more serious,
you get to
like more real life aspect of the show.
And later in the movie, you're seeing moments where they're like, dude, what's going on? And you can see the freak out in people that were normal at the beginning, normal procedure, and I'd call it a further breakdown of the movie, but we'll continue and get back to that.
But just him talking to the producer of the show and everything like that, and just mindless chit chat. Like, didn't really have much to say about that. But then he brings out his next guest, being Carmichael, who used to be a magician.
Such a dick.
Just a dick of the whole show and movie. And he used to be a magician, and now he's a paranormal investigator. And
more like an instigator is more like
right. Yeah, because like throughout the whole course of this, he pokes. It's basically poking the bear, like trying to prod, and he throughout the course of this interview between him and Christu, he calls Christu a charlatan, like he's a hoax, he's making stuff up, and he goes like, and I can prove all this stuff. And he has a check for anybody that can prove him wrong of $100,000. And later on, he brings it up to like $500,000, like $500,000. And he basically just does that. He just starts basically calling people fake and trying to prove them wrong of whatever that they're going for. Like Christy, for instance, of how he can speak to the dead and how he's a medium and all this bunch of stuff. But he goes like, but he's fake. He's phony. He's not. He's making it up.
The only difference between you and me is that I don't say that it's real.
Right.
Basically.
Yeah, because he's a magician, so he knows that things are fake, and now he's a paranormal investigator, to where he goes to places and tries to find ghosts. I think that's what it was.
Disprove ghosts.
Right, or disproving of ghosts actually being real.
In the search for truth, he has found only lies. Is basically what I am getting from his personality.
Right, because he also talked about how proving that magic is fake, because he used to be a magician, and then like people bending spoons and people talking to the dead. So he's been so used to doing things that are a lie that eventually he went and turned the corner and is like, now I want to find truth. Yeah, basically. Right. Which isn't a terrible thing. No. But the way he goes about it is most definitely atrocious. Yeah. Yeah. And then so he basically calls out Christu, and then Christu gets all mad about it, and he goes to storm off stage, and
attempts to.
Jack, and so he can't get the door open because there's a sliding door.
I laughed at that point. It's like, what? I'm trying to get out of here. How do you? I half expected him to turn around and be like, "How do I get out of here?"
Yeah. I forgot where I remember that from. I think it was from a show or a movie, but somebody just like tries to leave, and they're like, "How the hell do I open this door?" It's like something like that. But so Jack ends up finally standing up, and he goes like, "You know what? Christy was right about Minnie," and he goes like, "My wife's my nickname to her when we were in private was Minnie, and an unmarried man still wearing a wedding ring is me, because of course his wife died, and so he still wears the wedding ring because he still considers himself married and everything, which of course I would imagine that some people do."
Not that when I raised that, I am. Not that I'm that
My
guy.
wife is alive. She's well. She's at
very
home.
much. It's not a relation with the situation.
Yeah. And then while Christu was talking about the semantics of him calling or Carr is calling out the semantics of Christu being a fake and everything like that. Christu is also writhing in pain, and something's just not right with him, to the point where he collapses, and then he ends up projectile vomits black goo at Carr, and then Jack is yelling to cut to commercial, and then he throws up at the camera, and then it cuts to commercial, and then this is when
you see the aftermath of what happened. Yeah.
God damn it, man! Go to commercial. Go to a goddamn commercial.
basically the stuff that we don't see on TV being, again, the behind the scenes where it cuts to black or black and white, and now we see him, Christu's assistant, come in, and so she's all like, hey, like, is everything okay, blah blah, and so she finally calls for somebody to get help, like an ambulance, to come and get him.
And I will say I do like with this movie, the one thing I really do like is the cinematography that they do between the differences. So when the camera is on, it is very much the camera angles. Yeah. But when it's off, it does show, it's more freelance, it's more jittery, it's more in their face.
Yeah, it kind of makes it more documentary based, because you had the shaky cam of somebody like walking around, like
it has way more action associated with it.
Yeah, instead of having just a standstill camera that just like moves around left and right, or is just
I really like that decision, and yeah. I'm big with music and cinematography. They did really well. Yeah. With setting that up and achieving it. So.
Oh yeah, like the cinematography for this, of like we've been talking about, just going to how grainy the camera work is for the show specifically, and then the behind the scenes stuff of the cameras being off, of it cutting to black and white, and now it being an HD format,
and yet being more crystal clear despite being black and white. Exactly. Right.
And then also having Jack talk about like stuff that happens in the real world and everything that just happened, because that's what ends up like leaning into this, is where they, again, they have Christu get wheeled off by the ambulance backstage and everything, and
after the throw up, and
and because and then we come back from commercial, and I also like the fact that they have up the cards that's like, hey, welcome back, or like, we'll be right back, and stuff like that. I really like that they throw that in there too, because it makes it seem like that you're actually watching a late night talk show type of thing.
Again, all about setting an atmosphere.
Yeah. So and so we come back from commercial. Jack just basically talks about how, like, thank you for everybody that's calling, which I don't even know if anybody really called, because I don't think that anybody's told him about that or not. But I think for that kind of a certain situation, you kind of have to give the people at home like hope, like, oh yeah, thank you for people that call in, that are checking up on Christu, like, he's doing all right now, like, we're getting him the help that he needs, and like basically an ambulance is on the way, they'll check him out and everything like that, and whatever the fact is.
Goodwill.
And and then but yeah, and then this was the other thing too, was that while they were on commercial, Carmichael was talking to Jack about like the nickname. He goes like, oh yeah, he's using context clues to basically get this information, so that way he puts on a show, essentially.
What I talked about, probing. He's saying he's probing live. Right.
And then it was funny too, because he talked about how talking to Jack about him joining this special club that he's in, about like joining the, essentially kind of like the 1% almost, of doing lavish parties and like doing a bunch of things and like orgies and stuff, and he goes like, but mostly the orgies. I thought that was actually pretty funny. He's just a weird guy.
He's a slimo.
Yeah, he's a weird guy.
He's a slimo.
Yeah. I just found that to be pretty
I think
weird.
That was the part where they were talking about the Grove. That's when I think he mentioned the Grove, I believe, at this moment.
Yeah, it was the Grove, which is like, I don't know, like this niche, like, pact of people that are in like film and TV industry, to where like they're super popular, so they have this niche type of thing that they do.
San Francisco, Muir Woods, sycamore trees as tall as 20 plus men. Yeah. And now you put satanic rituals in the middle of all that.
Right. Which, speaking of satanic rituals, when they come back from commercial, Jack also talked about how he got this book that came across his desk, being called Conversations with the Devil, and he was talking to the woman that was part of the research behind it, and they basically rolled to a clip of her research that she made while filming it, and it's the first church of Abraxas. And so she finds out about this basically devil worshipping cult of Abraxas, who's a demon, and they are have their leader Xandar Debra, something like that. I can't remember specifically.
I think is how they pronounce it.
Oh, Diabro. Okay.
Diabo, yeah.
Diabo, and he talks about how Abraxas will not give them love or evil or good, or not show them the good and the evil, but what they desire the most. And
the ultimate humanist.
Right. And so the FBI starts to investigate because they get a tip about this, and they show her their investigation and want her to actually like basically get the facility to do their stuff. And they rescued a girl, and that's why they reached out to her in her facility.
The one that was saved when they burned it down.
Yeah. Well, no, because they said that the house just burnt down by itself.
No, that's what I mean. Like, when the house burned down, she was the one that survived.
Right. So she was the only survivor.
And that's...
yeah, and because, like, the whole thing was about him impregnating beautiful women and then just, like, having children so that way they can...
be born to be sacrificed.
Right. And
live to die.
Right. That's what it all was. But... yeah, so they had a 3-day standoff with the FBI that nothing really happened, but yeah, you know, like the house catches on fire and the girl is rescued, being Lily, and then finally get introduced to Dr. June and Lily, and when Lily is first introduced, she just stares at the camera the whole time, like, well, 95% of the time, because she's telling Jack like, "Oh, it's great to be here," and stares at the camera, just very creepily with a smile. And he goes like, you know, "Oh, like, you can just call me Jack," because I don't remember his last name, but she kept calling him by his last name. So he just goes like, "You know, you can just call me Jack, like, it's fine." And when so of course they go to break again, and she goes like, "Okay, like, which camera do I stare at now?" And he goes like, "Well, none, because they're all off." So you're like, "You're fine, you can relax." So they're like, "Oh, okay." And now the producer comes to Jack now that they're backstage, and he tells Jack that Christy was dead. Like, he was on the way to the ambulance, or he was in the ambulance, he was on his way to the hospital, and he just kept throwing up this black goo, and he just died. And then and he tells him like, "Oh, nobody can know about this," like, on stage. And we come back from break again, and so they're talking about Lily is possessed by one of Abraxas minions.
Still.
Like, yeah. And that's what she's trying to do. Dr. June is trying to... I don't know if she was essentially trying to get the demon out of Lily, or what it was.
Or if she was just using Lily as a launch pad.
For her career.
A lily pad, if you will.
But yeah, I just found it pretty interesting because I don't remember them talking about what she was researching for Lily, or like...
I think it was more of just a unique situation of something that you can't particularly solve, so the best thing you want is more information.
Right. And I mean, like, it's the natural human curiosity of going like, I need to find out more about this.
Which is kind of, you know, not always a good thing, as we find out later.
Yeah. And so they start talking about, June starts talking about the ceremonial items being like the stuff that they found at the house, being like a dagger that he would use for sacrificial purposes and all this bunch of stuff. And Jack starts talking to Lily about the demon, and she calls him Mr. Wriggles. and he's in her, and he's also like outside of her at the same time. And so
an ever-present being surrounding her.
Yeah. And because like early on in the show, Gus, being like his right-hand man for Jack, had, I don't remember what it was, the musical instrument that he was using, that like you didn't have to touch, but it made like wave. Yeah.
Put in the comment section what that is, because I forget that off of my top of my head. But it's a real life instrument that actually exists.
Yeah.
Without touching it, it'll use the electrical currents of your fingers to create wavelengths to make sound.
Yeah.
It's
and
very,
so
very
like
interesting.
the reason why that I mention this is because that starts freaking out. Like all of a sudden starts giving really big feedback, and then Gus tries to go and turn it off, and he gets shocked when he goes to turn it off, but Carr ends up unplugging it, and he goes like, "Oh yeah, it was feeding off the frequency from your surround, like your sound system." Yeah, and Lily goes like, "No, that's not what it was. It was actually Mr. Wriggles, like it was the demon." So, Jack asks if he could talk to the demon, and of course June refuses, and so Lily gives the blessing on it and everything, and so June goes like, okay, well, if we're gonna do this, you have to go by my rules. So that means no lights, no audience can like discuss or talk or anything like that. It has to be absolute quiet.
Remain calm.
So yeah, and so then of course they cut to another break, and now at this point Gus is talking to Jack about the interview, and that the crew are talking about how spooked that they are, and like some of them are talking about quitting just because the show is tanking, as well as the fact that people are just freaking out because of what's been happening.
And they found out about what
that Christou died.
It actually got spread around.
Right. And how that got circulated, I have no idea. And then we also find Carr, who's probing the two ladies in the front row in the audience about talking to Christou, and they go like, yeah, like his assistant was asking us questions and stuff. I was like, huh, interesting. So now he's trying to allude to the fact that Christou is actually just a con artist,
just
like,
to further his case, basically.
Yeah, just to make himself feel good, you know, getting all warm and fuzzies. And
not that there's anything in there, but
yeah, just a husk of human, honestly. And we come back from the break, and now June is basically getting the demon to come, Mr. Wriggles, to like basically talk with him and stuff, and they finally reveal the demon that's inside of her, which is actually really awesome prosthetics that they used in makeup and stuff like that.
One of my more favorite segments of the film.
Yeah, because this is when everything starts to actually go off the rails, is this point specifically. Because the first half of the movie is just like them doing random stuff like a normal talk show would. And now this is when things start to actually escalate significantly. Mm-hmm. And when stuff actually goes off the rails. Because they start talking and stuff like that, and the demon turns to Jack and says that I know you. And so Jack goes like, well, I don't think we've ever really talked. And so the demon mentions like, no, we met in the tall trees. And I think it's alluding to the fact that he was with the Grove, and that's what they did, was that they went to a place with tall trees and stuff. That's what I think.
While he may not have seen them, they were seeing them.
Yeah. And it definitely gives off the culty vibe of that too, almost, of the Grove and all that stuff. Because they never really talked about that up until like Carr was talking to Jack about that, like while the cameras are off.
Yeah, but it was only really introduced at the beginning.
Right.
And then that's where it kind of segued in a minor bit.
Right. And so now they're talking, going back and forth, bantering, and which was really interesting because the demon starts talking to Jack about his wife, and that June and Jack are now basically together, and because of course, just like in The Exorcist, where
up in the hills, it's
like,
very little song
like singing about like Jack and June go up the hill to fuck each other's brains out.
Jack and June went up the hill to fuck each other's brains out. Jack and June went up the hill to fuck each other. That's enough.
And that's essentially what it is. And then June gets fed up and slaps her, and then it seems like that Jill is back. But again, because demons are pretty tricky as far as we're aware in TVs and shows or in movies, that they can choose to essentially bring out like the person, because like, you know, they're basically playing the gimmick that they are the person that they are possessing. And then so like she tries to exorcise the demon, it seems like, because she pulls out a pendant out of her shirt that she's wearing around her neck, and she's like saying kind of like I don't know what you would call it, essentially
an enchantment,
yeah,
or a disenchantment kind of a thing. I'd like go back to where you belong, but at the same time you can see the Abraxas demon that's in her.
Yeah.
Was pretty much laughing at the attempt.
Right. Because then she was also talking to her while June was trying to do this enchantment.
A mocking.
Right. And
it isn't really explicitly shown that the Abraxas demon willingly did that or was forced out. I think it just chose to give off the impression that it worked. It's like,
right.
You really thought you got me? Just wait, I'll come back when I want to at any moment.
Right.
I'm actually in control, not you.
Yeah. And I think that's also pretty interesting too, because like it seems like that Lily turns back to normal now that Mr. Wriggles is basically in the passenger seat. And
big quotation.
But even for me, I go like, it doesn't seem like that Mr. Wriggles is gone though.
That was a willingly pullback. That was not I'm forcing.
Just like, you know what? I'm just gonna force her to come back in.
I'm gonna give him the false impression that I'm gone and then wreck it.
Right.
I'm gonna wreck it.
I'm gonna wreck it.
I'm gonna wreck it.
And then they, of course, cut to another ad break, and then June starts asking Jack about these tall trees that the demon was talking about and everything like that. But this was also pretty interesting too, because throughout the course of the movie, of course, Jack is more trying to save his show. And
all of this is an effort to get more ratings so that he can finally surpass Johnny Carson. Right. And as it was said earlier in the film, to be a king. Yeah. He has aspirations beyond where he is at. Yeah. He is not satisfied with where he is currently at, and that probably explained why he went to the Grove in the first place. He wanted to go to something to become greater. Right.
So with that, and it's kind of like
selling your soul to the devil.
Right. I was just gonna say that too. Like basically, and that's the stigma in Hollywood. Is like, oh yeah, like they just became famous out of the blue and out of nowhere. So they must have and that's how it was also like with musicians back in the day too. Like
Bob Dylan.
Jimi Hendrix, because he learned how to play guitar with his left hand, so he was left-handed, and so I think that they specifically made a left-handed guitar just for him. But especially with all those types of things, like people were speculating like, oh, they must have sold their soul to the devil, because how else are they super famous, or how are they super talented in this regard and stuff. And then the producer comes up to him and they're talking, and he tells him like, oh yeah, like our ratings are sky high right now. And dude, we
might hit a 50.
Right. Like they're talking about
which is in Nielsen terms, like that's a big night. Yeah. That's like everybody's watching us. Right.
Because they talked about that they're as big as the moon landing for their ratings right now.
Everybody's watching us. Yeah.
And they were talking about the fact that they basically saved the show because now they're getting more shares. So they're like, maybe it's even 30 or 40 shares. So, and so they come back from break again, And then Carr wants to, and of course, like how Carr is, he starts talking about how it's fake and it's fabricated. And so he wants to show how it's fake. So he takes Gus and he comes over and wants to demonstrate how they did this with June and Lily. So him and Gus sit down and like towards the front of the stage, and he hypnotizes him as well as the rest of the people watching at home and on the audience, and he basically tells Gus like, hey, like, you know, you seem a little hot, and basically being the magician that he is, basically persuading him in a sense,
showing the hypnosis,
right? And then he goes like, oh yeah, you cut yourself shaving. So he goes like, oh yeah, or no, he says you got a cut on your neck. And he goes like, yeah, I cut myself shaving. And he turns and you see this giant gash in his neck. And then he starts like looking at it, and then all of a sudden these worms are coming out of his neck.
Ugh.
And because he goes like, oh yeah, you're like you I don't remember what the specific term is, but he basically says that, you know, you're afraid of worms. And he goes like, I am. Like, how did you know that? He goes like, oh, I could tell. Yeah. And so he starts freaking out because now there's these worms that are in his neck, and then he rips open his shirt and rips his stomach open to reveal a lot of worms just coming out of him now. And Carr is all like, okay, like, you know, at the snap of my finger, you're going to be awake. And then he snaps, and then nothing happens. And then he goes like, awake dreamer. And then all of a sudden, everybody finally is awake. Everything goes back to normal. Oh, but the biggest thing too was that a giant worm comes out of Gus's head,
eyeball,
out of his eye. I'm just like, that was actually really cool.
Why is Gus acting so silly?
This wasn't meant to happen.
I'm like, that was actually really interesting.
Going back to some more body horse stuff.
Right. And it was actually more like prosthetics too. Like it was kind of like the thing when we talked about that before too.
I love it. I love that. It gives an eek factor. More
it's
than
not just CGI. They wanted the more creep factor of it actually looking more real.
If I feel like I could touch it and I could imagine what it feels like, it hits just a little bit more. CGI can't really do that.
Yeah. So the prosthetics to that was actually really good, but
that was pretty cool.
And now they are like back to normal. Everybody's all like, what the hell just happened? And which Lily, while the worm was coming out of his eye, or before his eye was being ripped open by the worm, Lily is laughing and going like, why is Gus acting weird? Or why is Gus acting silly? And it's because that she wasn't under the hypnosis that we come to find out, because they roll the tape back to show what actually happened, because he goes like, yeah, you know, like you're like most of your people are skeptics, so I hypnotized you guys. And they essentially show back the footage and nothing is happening. Like it was all just in their heads, like they were just seeing it, and
basically proving what Carmichael pretty much right in the moment.
Yeah. Until this stuff actually starts happening, because that's the reason why that Lily was saying, why is he acting so silly? And that's the reason why, is because she wasn't under hypnosis, because Mr. Wriggles isn't hypnotized, essentially. So.
And then it leads into what I think Lily was the one that brought it up about, well, if you showed the film on this, and you keep calling us a fake, well, why don't we go back
and show our footage from earlier? Yeah, and then
and Carmichael agrees basically.
Yeah, and he goes like, all right, let's do it. So they bring it up, and then they show it, and especially when they first reveal the demon coming out with like the eye change too, where the face was all like prosthetic, and like it seemed like that her lip was cut too, and everything, and showing that thing that we were watching earlier in the movie, because now Carmichael is actually like in disbelief, and he goes like, you know what, I need to have my team look at this for forensic evidence, because he thinks that it's tampered with, that like it's still fake. And so he tries to basically say, oh, I need to take this footage because I need to further in depth go into it. And then while they're watching it, Jack notices that there's a head or face behind Lily's head when she's talking to Jack. And then so
he just sees something.
Yeah, he sees something, and like
he's like, wait a minute, go back.
So he goes back. So then they rewind it, and then now they're going frame for frame,
slower and slower,
like trying to see what's happening. And then it's no longer the face that was behind Lily's head, but instead it's his dead wife behind him with her touching his shoulder. And then I also noticed too on my second watch that her mouth was just like progressively getting wider stuff too. Creepy. And then when it cuts back to him, you see her hand still on his shoulder. And then all of a sudden she's not there. I'm like, that was good. That's a good creep factor right there.
Yeah, like showing something even though it's not there, but yeah.
Yeah, and then, of course, again, Carmichael is still in disbelief, and he goes like, you definitely fabricated with this. This isn't real. Like, your wife is now miraculously back alive, even though she's dead. And it's just like, yeah. Like, because she's a spirit. And again, he doesn't believe that spirits are real. He doesn't believe that ghosts are real. So, he's still in disbelief. And then, while all of this is happening, Lily is just like, it seems like that she's writhing in pain or something, or she's freaking out. So she's like putting her head basically between her legs. And then all of a sudden she's like engulfed in like electricity. And then the lights start like basically flickering, and then they turn off. And then when they come back on, all of a sudden her head splits in half, which was very shocking and surprising to me.
Yeah.
And then like it's just like electricity, kind of like a TV static, like in between her head.
We were already at about maybe a 50 in creep factor, and it just decided, okay, here we go.
Yep. Now we're gonna crank this up to 11, if not a 12. So
right now, here
like,
we go.
And this is actually the most exciting bit of the movie, is like from the demon coming out halfway through. And then just like some whatever. And then when Gus has the worms scene happen too. And now finally towards the end of the movie, where all this bunch of stuff and the demon finally not reveals itself, but like everything just goes.
It just goes full awry. Manifestation. Let's just call it what it is. It never left. It just decided this was the moment it was going to show up.
Right. And then I think that Gus tries to get up and leave. And then
he's like, demon, the power of Christ compels you.
Yeah.
The power of Christ.
Yeah, and then his head twists backwards to where his head's just now facing the other way. The power of Christ. And now he's dead.
Which is it was a very, that was definitely a CGI portion, obviously, but it was very well done.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Very well done. Mm-hmm. I thought that was like, okay, yeah,
I thought it was actually really good. And then June tries to do the spell again, and then the demon is just like basically choking her with her necklace, and then ends up cutting her throat with it too. Jack's just freaking out, and then he goes flying to the back wall behind him. And
it's the sliding door that won't open.
Yeah. And then Carr is now on his hands and knees worshiping this demon, of going like, please, I will do your bidding. I want to basically like be your servant now.
Take this check. Take this check.
And he goes like, here's the $500,000 because you displeased, or not displeased, but you made me believe that this is actually real. And then the check just burns. While also at the same time, and now he is engulfed in flames and is burning alive.
And the demon, in a very mocking tone, said abracadabra.
Yeah, and then just burns him alive, and then he also melts too.
Yeah, it definitely melted.
So. And yeah, then the producer gets Jack off the studio lot and everything, and then Lily pulls the camera towards her, like to her face, and then the cuts, and then it cuts out, and then there's just static, and then you see the demon's face like trying to like basically get out of the static. Kind of like if it's trying to get through your TV screens, because earlier in the movie, Carr was looking at the sacrificial dagger, and then he basically plays off like he's going to kill himself with the dagger, because he goes like, "Help! Abraxas is going to crawl through your TV screen, so you might want to turn your TVs off." And it's all like a gimmick, because Jack goes like, "Dude, knock it off." He goes like, "All right," and puts it down. And like again, alluding to the fact that the demon is going to come through your TV screens. And like I mentioned earlier, I thought it was actually interesting that what they were saying specifically about certain things that were going to happen, like, oh, the demon's going to come through your TV screen. Now we're at this point in the movie towards the end where the demon is trying to get through the TV screen. And I'm like, that to me, when a movie does that, does a recall, that actually like foreshadowing of what's going to happen, that actually like gets me going. I'm like, that actually is pretty awesome.
And then it cuts to technical difficulties.
Yeah, so then we cut to the production of it.
Another
being,
very 70s
like,
image.
Yeah, of like, hey, you know, like having technical difficulties. And then now it cuts into more like a high definition look to it. Now we're no longer having like the 70s look of the TV screen.
The literal frame of reference has changed.
Yeah. And now it's like Gus is now introducing Jack again. And so Jack comes in like normal, and he goes like, "What is going on?" And now it's just cutting to different bits that were happening in the first part of the show.
When his wife was still around.
Right. And when he was getting big into popularity for the show, and like especially when they showed all the bits that he was doing in the beginning of the movie.
When things were in order and things were better.
Right. And there was a kind of like a Steve Irwin like animal person there. And she like in the beginning of the movie she was talking about a tarantula. And now she's talking about the giant worm that was in Gus's head that broke out. And so he's like freaking out, and then
it's like corrupted memories. It's like
right.
It's like a demon is reaching into his mind
and showing him what he has like essentially sacrificed, because we'll get to that too. Because Gus and this old lady, they spin a wheel, and he goes like, you know, you might want to spin it hard because we actually had somebody do this, and it spun for hours. And it's the spinning wheel that Carmichael had on the watch to hypnotize Gus. And then Jack walks up to the camera and says like, "Turn off your TVs," and then he just starts screaming, "Turn it off." And then it cuts to him making the deal, like when he signs the agreement, the contract for the show, and somebody asks like from the cameras and goes like, "What did you have to sacrifice?" And the big head of the corporation goes like, "He hasn't sacrificed anything yet, but we'll see." And then all of a sudden, now there's one of the cult follower or the leader,
Diabo.
Yeah, Diabo is there now, and goes like, I don't remember what he was talking about.
It's implied that this is at the Grove.
Right. And
this
so
is at the Grove.
Yeah, and like I said, the context clues and the foreshadowing from the events that happened before are leading up to now. The demon coming through the TV screen. Now it's like, okay, like what did you have to sacrifice to get here? And like him kneeling down in front of this person that has an owl for a head, and like basically him bowing down and kneeling before his show, essentially.
You must kneel before you can rise.
Right. And then he is taking a drink from the cauldron that the big head, the big wig of the channel basically gave him, and so he drinks it. And then they all point to this door that he goes through, and it's his wife on her deathbed. And now he has to relive this again, but now she's talking about like, what did you have to sacrifice to basically make your show big? Me. You had to sacrifice me in order to basically get your show back because I was in your way. And it's just like, yeah, because to him, he wanted that fame, he wanted that popularity, and he wanted that niche to beat Johnny Carlson.
Johnny Carson.
Yeah, Johnny Carson.
But it could have been anybody.
Right.
He just wants to be the best.
Yeah. And
That's
like that was just like the big name for the time too.
That was just a placeholder for what he ultimately wants.
Right. So he wanted to beat Johnny Carson and
bigger. Just
yeah.
He wanted to be the new.
Right.
He wanted to be the king.
Yeah. And especially with his rise in popularity, he was almost up there with him. But again, Johnny Carson every night he just kept, winning by just a pew of just in popularity for Channel. And she's telling Jack, like, you have to sacrifice me. Like, sacrifice me. And so now he has the sacrificial dagger in his hand.
Do it.
And he stabs her. And then he finally wakes up to have him stabbed Lily instead. And then everybody's gone. Like, everybody's still dead. Like, Gus, June, Carlson, not Carlson, it's
Carmichael.
Yeah, Carmichael, and he is also dead, and so the camera is now panning outward, and he just keeps saying, "Wake up, dreamer."
And you hear like the sirens in the background.
Yeah, and I don't know if it was just like the cops or the ambulance or something, but and then it cuts to black, and like there's a little thing at the bottom that says "End of transmission." And then it said something that I don't remember. But it was basically the demon saying, like, so it should be, or something like that. And that's the end of the movie for Late Night with the Devil. Because it's not that long. It's only like an hour and a half.
Yeah, it's a very short.
But with the production companies, pretty sure it would have been less. Maybe by 5 minutes. So, but... yeah, so that's the end of the movie. I actually pretty enjoyed it for the most part. Definitely not a rewatchable movie for sure. I would probably say that if you really wanted to, you could show people going like, hey, check out how this movie is. Like, hey, like it's Halloween. Oh man, like, I haven't seen this in a while. Like, hey, like, let's watch this. Especially if somebody that hasn't seen it before. Because, like, definitely for me, it seemed really interesting when I was watching the trailers and stuff, like, back when it was first coming out. But now that I've seen it, it's just like, all right, it was okay. It was an all right horror movie.
I mean, I'm willing to give my consensus right now.
Yeah, we can definitely do that for sure. So, again, like I mentioned in the beginning part of the show, this is where we will give our consensus on it being a rent, where you will just, casually watch it every so often. A buy, you will run out and buy it and put it into your collection either on digital or on DVD. And then a skip, which is just essentially, just don't watch it. So, well, since you're itching to go, like, you can give your consensus.
I would call this a rent.
I mean, it's alright, like...
Yeah.
This is a hard rent for
right.
me. Almost borderline skip.
Yeah.
But definitely still rent.
Because we watched it because like it's available on Hulu right now. I don't know if it's available on Shudder, but it's available on Hulu right now for streaming. So
yeah, I would say it's a rent because it's a decent film. I didn't hate watching it.
Yeah,
I could see why some people would be like, oh, I don't want to ever watch this again. And I'd be like, all right.
Yeah, I respect it.
But for this, it's for what it's trying to set up atmosphere-wise, I like that a lot because you don't see a lot of things from like a show perspective, a genuine show perspective. So I like the setting a lot.
Yeah.
I almost kind of wished it to be just a little bit longer. I don't usually say that about films like this, but I actually kind of wish it had maybe 15, 20 more minutes to it so that way they could flesh out some more storyline edges. But
yeah, it just felt like that everything was just like flowing super quick.
But I could also see the argument of that is part of the setup is that
right.
It is just a hour and a half segment for a TV show.
Right.
And that's why it said end transmission at the end. It's kind of like, oh, okay.
Like that's
the show.
That's the end of the show right there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it might be just by design. which it probably is. But I think it's just a hard rent.
Yeah.
Don't hate it, but I don't need to watch it for the next 6-7 years.
Right. Yeah, and it's the same thing for me. I would say that it's a rent as well.
I mean, it's alright, like...
And I would basically agree with you that, like, oh yeah, like, I wouldn't watch it all the time. Like, every so often, maybe, like I mentioned before, like, you know, showing a friend or, like, sitting down and watching it with other people would actually make it a little bit better. Because, like I said, it's a pretty short movie. It's only, like, an hour and a half long. But not a whole lot pretty much happens, like, throughout the course.
It's definitely more slower paced at the beginning.
Yeah.
But not in the best of ways.
Right. It's not like trying to hold your attention, and that's the thing. Because, again, it's just basically about a late-night TV show host that's trying to save his show, and that's all that it is. And him trying to get these people, especially for it being on Halloween, definitely brings out the creep factor for sure, for all this much stuff to unravel and unfold as the movie goes on, and as well as for him, the show. Because then, you know, like, you get introduced to this researcher, this doctor that is researching about this cult that, you know, conjured up a demon, and then the demon turns out to be actually real, and then that's when your ratings shoot up, and then you're like, oh man, what can we do now? What comes next? And I definitely like the aspect of, like I mentioned earlier, with it being that they do callbacks. Of it being like, oh yeah, you know, like, turn your TVs off, otherwise the demon will come out of your TV screens. And when the demon is finally out, that it's now being in the TV, you see the face coming through the static. It's like, that means that the demon is trying to get out of the TV and into your homes. And then same thing for him talking about the tall trees and what he had to sacrifice to basically get his show and everything like that. And, you know, like, turns out that he had to sacrifice basically his wife, because in the back of his mind, like, he had to sacrifice his wife just for him to basically have his show be fully fledged out and everything. So, but yeah, so that's our consensus on the movie. It is a rent. I almost said buy, just because we've gotten so back to back to back to back of just movies that are buys.
This is my first really hard rent for me.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, because like I mentioned, it's free on Hulu right now, as long as you have a subscription, and, like, I'm pretty sure that's available on Shudder. I'm not too sure. I didn't really do research on that, but yeah, otherwise, like, it's definitely a rent for sure. And I also wanted to talk about these taglines, so, because, like, I didn't even look at these, but, like, I figured that these would be pretty good going forward, just doing taglines for movies. So that way you get, like, the idea of what the movie could be about or get your attention. So here we go. We got a 1970s late night talk show goes to hell in this fiendish horror thriller, which I would have to say that's what pretty much happens. Again, a poll to get you to watch it for sure. The live television event that shocked the nation. Honestly, I would say that it did, for sure. Exorcism with a twist. I really wouldn't say that because they didn't really exorcise the demon. So,
AKA we didn't do it.
yeah. Do not adjust your set. Don't adjust your set. Which, again, why put both of those in there? Like, that doesn't make any sense. Do not and don't are basically the same thing. Just abbreviated for don't, for do not. Which is a thing on basically people flipping through the channels. It's like, don't touch that dial, or like, don't touch your remote.
Don't go anywhere.
Yeah. And then last thing we got is like, you don't know what he sacrificed to get here.
You'll find out.
Yeah.
And you did.
So, and like, it's actually a pretty interesting movie, I would say. But now we're gonna get into Wrong People. I got a couple of them, so which I would have to agree with one of them, the other one not so much, but we'll do that, and then we'll get to the last bit that I had as a surprise, and then we will call it. So first one is that this person says, good storyline, but let down by the execution, which I would have to agree. Like, it's a good story. Don't get us wrong. Like, it's a really good story, but the execution on it is just kind of falls a little bit.
Man.
So this person says, like, they're confused with the ratings of how high it is. I would say that, like, it does deserve some good ratings, just not super high regarded ratings, for sure. But it was misleading to me. Excuse me. This is, for me, was a letdown. The storyline and plot had potential, but I found the acting and joke scenes cringe, which I will agree. The jokes weren't really jokes. Like, it's a late night talk show, so of course they gotta bring out some jokes.
It's about the setting. Again, It's all about the setting.
Right. That's what it is. It's not just like, oh yeah, like their jokes are just cringe. It's like, no, they were intentionally made that way. Like, that's just how it was.
Just turn on Jimmy Fallon. You'll know exactly what the same feeling is.
Right. I understand that this was purposefully done to show similar 70s show formats, but didn't work for me. It's like, again, like, it's not meant to be funny. It's just meant to show for the time. I expect after watching a horror movie late at night. Hold on. Excuse me. Thank you. To needing to follow up with some comedies or light, funny banter before bed. This wasn't scary or really funny. Yes, there were a couple of jump scenes. It just didn't hit the mark in executing a movie where you can't stop thinking about what if. The acting was purposely exaggerated and annoying. The ending complimented the movie, annoying. I wouldn't waste my time at the movie. Wait for it to stream. Storyline had potential and wasn't executed through cringe acting. Not a horror or comedy. If there was a cringe genre, that's where I'd place it. I would say for half of that of what he was saying was true. I would agree with half of it.
It's a hit or miss.
Yeah. But as far as like him talking about like
miss,
the cringe humor behind it, the exaggeratedness of the acting, it's like, again, this is basically the 70s, so that's why that stuff is there.
Believe it or not, par for the course.
Yeah. I mean, like, that's just how they are. They are meant, like, late night, or rather just talk show hosts in general, they are meant to exaggerate things to get people's attention. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to hold your attention. Because if you just have somebody go like, hey guys, we got a great show tonight. We're going to have this guy come on about his book. We're going to have this celebrity talk about their movie. We're going to have some games. And then we're going to go home and have a good night.
Thanks for telling me everything before it happened.
Right. And it's all like, you know, you have to have that flair to it, to grab people's attention, to have them not interject, but be energized and be wanting to participate and all this bunch of stuff, and like say, hey, you know, like this was actually a good show. Like you feel like that you could be there, and that's what it would feel like if you were there to be there in live in person, type of atmosphere. But yeah, I would definitely agree that the movie, the ending was actually pretty good, but otherwise, like, you know, like they said, you know, just wait for it to be on streaming, which again it is.
It's about a 60-40 split of agreement.
Right. And like, you know, if you want to buy it, then you can buy it. We're not giving our consensus on whether you should rent, buy, or skip it, and like that's just how we feel about the movies that we talk about. Like, you know, to some people this could be a really, really good movie, and like I would agree with them. And you know, I would say that it's a good movie, but it's not enough just to go out and buy it though. That's why that we have the rent, buy, and skip format. This other one is like, don't waste your time or money. I would say money because it was released in theaters, and also like, you know, you can buy it on streaming and DVD and stuff. But they said it was awful, that they fell asleep to it, not scary at all, just dumb, very disappointing. Could have been a great plot. Don't waste your time. Terrible. Not sure how this movie won any awards. Clearly it's a money grab. Don't waste your time. Again, if you watch the trailer, that's basically the entirety of the movie. Not scary, just weird. Don't waste your time. If you're having trouble sleeping, watch this movie. It's so terrible and boring, you'll fall asleep with ease. Great for taking a nap. I want to go that far as to saying that it's not scary, or that, you know, it's a movie that you can just fall asleep to or anything like that. I would say that it is boring for sure in some aspects, but that's just, you know, again, like a late night type show.
It all goes back to, is that a part of the boringness? The boring parts of the movie are, I almost feel like, are supposed to be that way, because then it makes what happens later being like,
more
That's
impactful,
different.
right? Because
But
especially where there's like those tidbits of like where, John, I'm blank on his name now. The guy from the beginning, the medium, where Christu, where his eyes rolled back, and it's like, whoa.
You've seen the act beforehand.
Yeah.
You've seen the same kind of thing that Christu does at the beginning.
Yeah.
But you don't usually see them with their eyes starting to roll back.
Right.
Like, oh, this is more intense.
Yeah.
It's
And then him puking up black goo and stuff like that. It's
so
just
it may
like,
not be like the ultimate scare factor, but based on the absence of stuff different than what you've already known in the beginning is what makes the stuff later on be like, oh.
Yeah.
Your reaction probably wouldn't have been as much if the beginning wasn't as boring. And that's kind of where I go back and forth about, like, yes, it's boring, but is that by design? Like, my brain automatically goes back to that.
Yeah, because, like...
So I can't really say that that's a positive for him. I can't really say that's a negative either. That's just me. I'm kind of like, again, 60-40.
Yeah.
I'm in agreement, but the other 40 is like what I just said.
Yeah. Because, like, I would definitely say that between the both of us, it's definitely borderline on a rent and a skip. Mm-hmm. Not necessarily a rent or a buy. Just because, like...
That's the tightrope.
Yeah. Like, it's the duality of going, like, well, it's boring, but it has some good stuff that happens in the movie, though. Like, that's the thing.
I'm also just trying to find the positive in absolutely everything I watch.
Yeah, because, like...
like the cinematography, I actually really like that part between the off-screen, on-air stuff. I really like that. It added an element I did not expect to actually see in the film. Right.
And I also love the fact for the film that when they would cut to break, it would show what would happen while they were on break that you don't get to see on TV. Mm-hmm. So I found that to be interesting. I also found the fact that, like, you have all these behind-the-scenes stuff of the actual real world of these people that they're being affected. Like, Gus is super worried about the show, and, like, how people are talking about that they're wanting to leave and everything like that. So, like, that to me was actually very interesting to see and hear by watching this. Like, that sort of thing just, like, kept me interested in watching this. But otherwise, it's that borderline.
I could understand.
Yeah. So, but yeah, so that was Raw on People. And then I want to get into the last bit of a surprise, which I talked to you about this yesterday, which I thought this was actually a pretty good idea. So, because that we essentially have different movies that we want to talk about, there's always sometimes of us coming up to each other going like, hey, what movie do you want to talk about? Especially if there's like new movies that come out and like we just don't care to go and watch them. That's also the other thing too. But what I want to do is spin a wheel. And so this is what I'll be doing up until we actually get some people that want to make recommendations to us, which, in case you guys don't know, you guys can make recommendations of movies for us to talk about. Could be your favorite, could be your worst movie, doesn't matter. Like, if you want us to talk about them, that's great, that's awesome. But I wanted to spin a wheel of decades is what I'll spin the wheel for first. And then if it lands at a certain decade, so the 90s for instance, then I'll spin another wheel in that year of the 90s of it being that we will land on, let's say, 95. And then we will talk about whatever movie that, again, the wind will pick for us that we will talk about for that next week. So here we go. We're going to spin the wheel and we're going to see what happens. So, landed on 2010s.
2010s.
So now we will spin the wheel for the 2010s and then we will see what we get. So the year is 2018 and now we get to find out what movie that we're going to talk about for 2018. Alright, and now we're going to spin the wheel to see what movie in 2018 we're going to talk about. So for me, I basically picked the top movies in that year. And it is actually going to be Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse.
Believe it or not seen it, but I've only heard great things.
So good, especially the sequel Across the Spider-Verse. That movie like blows that one out of the water. I've actually heard people not be into the Spider-Man Spider-Verse movies, which is insane. But
Not gonna say it.
yeah, we will get into that next week though. But yeah, next week we will be talking about Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. It is such a good movie. I actually have the steelbook for it. I also yesterday bought from Barnes & Noble the Spider-Verse Spider-Man book, comic. So it's just a collection of all the different Spider-Man like comics of different Spider-Man.
Speaking of comic books, I got to read that other one, the John Wick
John
one that you
Wick one,
mentioned. I got to get that back to Chris.
Yeah, Chris wants to borrow it.
Be jelly bitch.
Yeah. And Chris, we know that you're watching, so. But yeah, so that was this week's episode talking about the Late Night with the Devil. Blah. Thank you all so much for watching. As always, you guys can check us out on YouTube. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Be sure to check us out on Spotify. You guys can also check us out on our Instagram and on our TikTok, where I will be posting clips of the episodes that we record. And also, like I mentioned earlier, be sure to make a recommendation of a movie that you guys want us to talk about in the comment section below. And again, you guys can also reach out to us on Instagram and on TikTok. And we will see you guys in the next one next week.
Peace.